haunts me every time my alarm goes off.
Depends on the sport a little bit, but
I need to worry they're bad at what I teach.
So excited to hit this workout.
I'm so glad my parents never let me.
You're listening to the Live, Lift, Play podcast.
So, hey guys, welcome to the Live, Lift, Play podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Kinsella, and today I'm honored to have Coach Mike Burgener, or as most of you would know him as Coach B. He is on the show today, and we're going to be discussing about weightlifting with youths, kids and teens, and just how, where they need to start. But for people that may be living under a rock and have never, or watched this show and have never heard of Coach B, he is one of USA Weightlifting's top tier coaches. He's worked from the novice to the top level. He's a father, a husband, he's a grandfather. I think only recently a new grandchild in the family, is there?
Yeah, I've got just two that are under a year and another one on the way. So total of 7 coming up. 7.
Go busy. So yeah, and his Coach B, I got to know you and see your videos through CrossFit, like so many other people. But for I suppose my first question for you is, when it comes to working with kids and teenagers, where do you start them when it comes to Olympic weightlifting? Where would you start?
Yeah, that's a great point. And just for the record, my philosophy has always been that I believe in body weight exercises before barbell exercises. Having said that, a body weight exercise is, I can use PVC pipe, which I don't know how many grams that is, but in pounds and ounces, it's about a half a pound or something like that. It's not very much at all. And then as we get our fundamentals dialed in, which are stance, grip, and positions, then we can go up to maybe a little bit heavier implement with PVC pipe filled with sand. But the bottom line is that you would never take a youngster, a child, and load them up with a barbell before you would have the body weight exercises dialed in and checked in. And so for me, body weight exercises can be the use of PVC pipe to teach those fundamentals of stance, grip, and positions.
Yeah.
And at the age, you know what? My little children, with Sage as an example, was 3 and 4 years old, coming in the gym and taking PVC pipe. And she wasn't on a structured program or anything like that, but she would just come in the gym and do a couple of high hang snatches because that's what she saw the other athletes that were in the gym doing. And I certainly didn't try to keep that from happening. I let it happen.
Yeah.
But I didn't put her on a structured program until she was, ready to be on that program. And that readiness is when the child or the youngster is willing to make that little bit of commitment for, 15 to 30 minutes a day of doing fundamentals and work with that PVC pipe and walking lunges and step ups and, again, push-ups, body weight exercises that are dialed in before we allow them to use the barbell.
Yeah. And we'd have something similar. We start off body weight, we do PVC, and it's always good movement trumps bad movement. But at a younger age, our junior kids, it's, can you take a PVC pipe from your hip to above your head?
Yeah.
And it's more, we're kind of trying to teach monkey see, monkey do. And if I do it and I bend my elbow and I catch it, then you can do it too. And it's just, we drill it in more of a game pattern. And then it just becomes an automated system. And then as they progress, so for example, our kids this week, some of our older kids, we have 13 principles, 11 of them they have to be able to complete for 10 reps without coaching, which means they can show control. And if they can pass that, then we'll allow them to move to a 4 kilo training bar for overhead squats or back squats, front squats. Still, maybe not Olympic lifting. We do have the sand and the pipes as well. But yeah, like the body weight stuff, and I see, and I think a lot of coaches try to impress by getting, oh, look at my young kids able to do this. And it's not necessarily what the kid needs at the time. It's more trying to show off for Instagram or Facebook. And yeah, I've seen that. I don't kind of like that idea of it, because I think kids need to learn from every aspect, and body weight, gymnastics, just play. And like you say, like your kids were kind of running in, doing a few movements and then running out and playing, and that type of stuff I think is really good. But I suppose as kids get older and they make that decision and they're in the weight room, for you then, obviously, so Olympic lifting is a high skill sport. So how often would you train it every day with them? Would you let them to train, or would you have specific days that, right, we're going to work on body weight and more structured strength, and then we'll do the high skill development strength work like Olympic lifting on these days? Like, how would you approach that?
Well, my school hired me as a full-time physical education teacher as well as a strength coach. So I got to write the curriculum for my classes in phys ed. And my final exam consisted of the snatch, the clean and jerk, and the front squat. And it was never graded on how much weight you could use, how much light weight you could snatch, or how much weight you could front squat. That was never part of the alternative. What was part of the alternative was that I developed a 10-point grading system. And if the athlete or the student achieved 8 points, then the lift would count. Yeah. 8 out of 10, the lift would count. If the athlete did not achieve 8 points, then the lift would not count. So for me and my students, the fact that I never graded on how much weight they lifted, it became a very important entity to have correct technique and correct form. But to answer your question, yes, we predominantly did snatch, clean and jerk, and front squat, but we also, I taught them, bodybuilding movements. We did bench press, we did back squats. We always did more front squats than back squats. We did, those bodybuilding exercises that kids like to do, the dumbbell curls. We really wanted to work. Our goal was to snatch, clean and jerk, and front squat, and then work our accessory movement patterns that were going to work on our weaknesses that were, part of our training, or part of that particular body.
Yeah. So when you were designing that, like, how did you see the kids respond? I like the idea of just that the technique issue was to get your 8 points, you had to show good technique regardless of weight. Whereas, like some people, obviously, eventually you get to an age in the sport, in all sports, where, especially in lifting sports, where weight is the goal if you're looking to compete or get to the next level. How did you see that develop for the kids you worked with in the school system? How, like, their confidence, their body awareness? What was the kind of feedback you got from working with youths?
Well, in my school, first of all, you could not just come into the program. It was a program that I had to accept you to come into. It wasn't something that all kids had to take. But, the maximum kids that I was supposed to have in a class were like 30 kids in a class, but I had 60 kids in a class because I wanted every student to have the opportunity to learn the Olympic lifts. And so the kids really wanted to be there. They had a very high desire to be in the weight room. Of course, they wanted to look good for their girlfriends, but on the other side of the coin, we had a weightlifting team as well. So if I had 5 periods of physical education, all 5 periods, we're learning the Olympic lifts as well as the fundamental exercises of the bench press and incline bench press, dumbbell work, and all that kind of stuff. But the weightlifting team didn't have to run. So, it was my belief that running, and I don't know if I believe that now, but it was my belief that long distance running didn't necessarily go hand in hand with heavy Olympic style weightlifting. So we had a weightlifting team at Rancho Buena Vista High School, and those kids were highly motivated to join the team because they didn't have to run for physical education. But they had to join USA Weightlifting, and they had to go to our weightlifting contest that were typically against other schools that were of like mind with us. So it wasn't hard to get these kids motivated because they were basically self-motivated. And I didn't, I really didn't care how much weight they lifted. I just wanted them to be healthy and fit. We talked a lot about nutrition, but the most important thing for us was to work on the fundamentals of Olympic weightlifting. And they were taught the stance, grip, and positions of the Olympic lifts and the snatch, the clean, and the front squats. They were given points of performance that they had to meet. And at the same time, that was the same for bench press and incline bench press and dumbbell curls. But we really hung our hats on the Olympic lifts. And that was my philosophy of being a teacher and a coach. And my weightlifting program was probably the most sought after program in the school that we had. People really liked the discipline. They liked the structure. These kids are all getting testosterone and estrogen in their bodies, and they wanted to look good for their girlfriends and their boyfriends. And so it was a very disciplined class, but at the same time, it was a lot of fun. They enjoyed it.
And I think that the discipline aspect is really because we've set rules in the gym. There's certain things we expect you to follow. We want you to have fun along the way. But what I also find is that when you teach a kid, any kid, even kids that don't play sport, that they can be strong at something. There's a mindset there. There's a mindset switch. They're competent in movement. They're more confident. And then even especially, I'm sure you've witnessed it, but I find that when young girls show how strong they are, it's a whole other ball game. It's just like a light bulb moment for them that they can do so much more. Did you see that? Like currently now between our 10 to 12-year-olds, I say our girls, like technique and weight, and I know weight's not really an issue, but they kick ass on the boys.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. The boys are like gorillas in a donut shop, right? They all they want to do is bull their neck and bubble their snot and lift as much weight as they can lift, and they really don't care what the technique looks like. And as a teacher and an instructor, I had to rein those guys in, but the girls would listen. Yeah. And, the fact that there wasn't any heavy requirements on them to lift heavy weights, they loved that. So it became like gymnastics and weightlifting, I mean, the idea that these kids could go and do full movement patterns, where every muscle group in the body was going to be worked, and yes, they wanted to look good in their bikinis in the summertime. There was no doubt about that. And as they started getting older, these kids are 16, 17, 18 years old. The old hormones are just flowing and they want to look good. So whereas the boys, they're really just gorillas, and the girls are like ballerinas. They really wanted to please me, number one, but they were really concerned about their grades. And the fact that they scored 8 with technique, even with the PVC pipe, got them an A. They were all over that. And then once that they got their confidence and they started lifting heavy weights, the old progressive overload system kicked in. And the next thing you know, these girls are snatching body weight and clean and jerking 1.25 times body weight and scoring 8, 9, and 10 on that technique scale. And of course, the boys are snatching 200 pounds and scoring a 3 or 4 and not having it counted. Yeah. That just infuriated them. But they learned that if they got good technique, they could also snatch 200 pounds and have it count. So they learned you just had to make them believe that you were serious about about their technique and how you were going to grade them and what you would accept and wouldn't accept.
Yeah. And with you being in the school as a teacher, would their overall grades in all other subjects, would that matter about them being on the team? So if they weren't performing in everything, you'd have a chat with them as well?
Oh yeah, my my grade counted just like a math grade counted as well, and a lot of the sports teams would send their athletes to me during the period 1 through 5 time period. Now, period 6 was always for athletic PE. That was always during football season. The football team would come in after school and I would work with them after school. But 6th period, and the teams that were out of season, like the basketball team or the wrestling team or whatever, they would all come into my class. Well, it was the same requirements for them. And I had the backing of all the administrators, the athletic directors, the guy that hired me, and the coaches all wanted their athletes to be stronger. And they loved the idea that they didn't have to work with them, but I got to do the work.
Mm. And
so they totally bought into it.
And with the other, like, so you got the football teams and the wrestling and stuff, there's I competed as a lifter for, I'd say, 3 years. It wasn't very good, but I loved the sport, and I loved that it was so hard to master, and it takes time and discipline. You got to be willing to put your body in it, and you really got to do more than just turn up. You have to be switched on as well. Right. The benefit of teaching Olympic lifting to so many people, like I suppose most sports, I think nearly every sport can benefit from learning even parts of the Olympic lifts, because it's showing triple extension. It's an explosive movement. It's speed plus power, speed plus strength, creating more power, and especially in a collision sport, you need it. Did you always put the Olympic lifts in for all the other sports, or did it vary depending on the sport?
No, every sport. There wasn't they hired me because of my expertise in the Olympic lifts. They didn't hire me to be a powerlifting coach or a bodybuilding coach, which we taught. I mean, kids are vain, right? They want to look good in a bathing suit, and in their street clothes and so on and so forth. So, and I understood that. But my emphasis, the final exam wasn't on the bench press. The final exam was on snatch, clean and jerk, and front squat, not back squat, but front squat. And it didn't matter how much weight you lifted. That was the selling point. But you had to get an 8 points out of 10. Out of 10 possible points, you had to get an 8. And when you got that 8, you got an A. It was that simple. Now, there was a lot of other things that were involved in it, like you had to dress out every day. You had to be on time. There was points that were taken off if you didn't dress, or points were taken off if you were tardy. But you could also come in at lunchtime and lift and make up those tardies or make up those non-dress out periods. So I gave them every opportunity to be successful. Yeah. And if, everybody has brain farts, we all have bad days. And so if you had a bad day, well, you can come in, before the grading system's over with and make that bad day into a good day and still get a good grade.
And with, obviously you had rules, and if people weren't in the right gear, if they were late. So I'm a firm believer in discipline and hard work, but where, did that come from just how you learned sports and how you learned and your career, or have you always been disciplined?
Ever since I was a young lad, I've been very disciplined. My dad was a very disciplined man. He was a coal miner and a farmer, basically. But growing up, I was very disciplined. I loved athletics, and my dad would tell me, that you got to slow down. You're actually doing too much, so you won't recover from what you're supposed to be doing. And I had to learn that, in sport in high school. But really, I did not start lifting weights until I was a university student. and I was a football player in college at the University of Notre Dame, the Fighting Irish, right?
Yes.
So I mean, that's was my background, but that's when I really started lifting weights. When I was growing up in high school, I'd do push-ups and sit-ups and lunges and that kind of stuff. But my dad didn't believe in allowing me to lift heavy implements, shoveling cow shit and, shoveling coal and that sort of thing would make me strong. And that was his belief. But when I went off to the university and they wanted me to gain 20 pounds, then weightlifting became a very important part of my development. And Olympic style weightlifting just happened to be the philosophy of my strength coach at Notre Dame. So I took to it like, right away. Just I loved it. So I became very infatuated with lifting weights in the snatch and the clean and jerk and so on.
And if am I right in that weight, your coach was Father Lang?
Father Lang was my first Olympic weightlifting coach. He was a Catholic priest, and he made his own equipment. And Notre Dame was probably the first university to have a strength room, a room. I visited a lot of universities, but none of them had a room like Notre Dame had with Father Lang. And Father Lang was self-supporting. He was the guy that could build his own equipment. And York Barbell Club, which was a major manufacturer back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, would supply Father Lang with barbells and that sort of thing. But he made all of his own benches and squat racks and pulleys and things like that. He was a master craftsman.
So how big of an influence was Father Lang on you in regards to strength training or the Olympic lifts?
Yeah, he was my influence. He was my first coach. He was the guy that set the wheels in motion, so to speak, of directing me to the path that I'm at. I mean, I'm basically retired now, but the bottom line was, if it hadn't been for Father Lang, I probably would have never gotten into the depth of strength training that I have now. Notre Dame had a weightlifting team that during the off season of football, I would take a group of 10 athletes, and we would travel all over the Midwestern United States, and we would compete. And even as a freshman at Notre Dame, Father Lang saw the potential in me as a coach, and I was the coach of the Notre Dame weightlifting team, even as a freshman. So I ended up coaching, sophomores, juniors, seniors, and even graduate students. So my first job of coaching weightlifting was done when I was like 19 years old, when I was a freshman at Notre Dame.
Wow.
So Father Lang was everything to me. He was everything. But he saw a lot of potential in me. He saw the discipline. I mean, I would get up at 4:00 in the morning and go over to his gym and work out. And I asked him for a key to the weight room, and I was the only student that Father Lang ever gave a key to his weight room so that I could go in and train at 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning.
Wow. That's discipline. So 4 o'clock.
I was extremely disciplined. And there was a lot of, there was another guy named Louis Fournier. He was a football player as well. And Louis and I were the only two guys that would go over in the morning and get our workouts in before we would go to classes. We'd go work out, we'd come back and shower, we'd go have breakfast, and then we'd go to classes. And in the off season, we'd have another workout. We'd have another workout in the evening, after school. I mean, after classes were over with.
Because I think there's a moment in a lot of people's lives when you meet someone and they have that kind of hook on you. And like for you, Father Lang, I had a coach, his name was Mike Hollis. And it just, from day one, it was an instant respect, because the only way to earn his respect was for me to do the work that was required for me to better myself. And I remember that he was a basketball coach, and Ireland's not the best in the world at that sport. But one of the stories that he told me Oh no, I told him he came he was visiting from North Carolina. He came in and he was like, "How are you doing?" I was like, oh, I'm doing okay." He's like, "Did you make the team?" And I was like, "Nah, it's politics. They only want people from certain areas. They don't want people from where I'm from." And he goes, "That's bullshit. You weren't good enough." And I was like, "No, I was good enough. I could beat those players hands down." He's like, "You weren't good enough. You weren't good enough to impress them or for them to overlook where you're from. Go back again and do it harder next year." And like, if he could say whatever he wanted and that would make me work, and next year, guess what? I got on the team. And it wasn't because of where I was from, it was because I worked my ass off even harder because I had to earn it. And I suppose Coach Mike Hollis to me is similar to your Father Lang to you, is you, when you respect someone so much and they respect you for putting the work in. I think that is it's good to have someone like that enter your life, because someone you would talk about forever, I suppose. And then maybe, I'm sure people have that same thought of you. And I hope some of my kids eventually, when they're older, might have it of me if I'm doing a good job.
Well, that's what we can hope. And, you know, and the other thing is too, is that Father Lang was the type of guy that, you know, he would never ask you to do something that he wouldn't have done or he hadn't done already. You know, and he was that type of leader. He was a lead by example type of a person. And my whole life I've had those kind of guys. My football coach at Notre Dame was Ara Parsegian, and he's the guy that taught me about the fundamentals of teaching. You know, I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be football, baseball, basketball, weightlifting, track and field. There's fundamentals that have to be met. And so you work the fundamentals every day, and you work the drills and skills every single day. It's not all day long, but you take a period of time, 15 minutes a day, and work those fundamentals and skills and drills. And over time, that skill level, it builds. And you have weightlifting is beautiful because you have progressive overload. You can start with the barbell and add sand to it, and then add pipe to it, and then, you know, get a training bar, and you know, and you progressively overload, but you never go to one step before you've mastered that first step.
Yeah.
So in my world, mastering the PVC pipe, you master the PVC pipe, you master the barbell. And that's what Father Lang taught me was, you know, you don't start at trying to bench press 300 or squat 300 or 150 kilos. You start by doing the PVC pipe you work on that ankle, knee, and hip mobility and that shoulder mobility. You learn that first before you put all the other things into action. And he was the one that taught me that mobility, speed, and strength in that order was what the Olympic weightlifter needed, and really all athletes. I mean, the football player needs mobility. He needs speed. He needs strength. An Olympic weightlifter is no different than any of the volleyball athletes, the basketball athletes. They're all the same. You need that mobility, speed, and strength, and you need to teach the fundamentals of stance, grip, and position. You get all that action worked out, and it just carries over to your sport of play.
And with, like, again, coming back to kind of the kids, like one of the things I know, like I learned from Jeff was there's two types of faults. There's efficiency faults and there's safety faults. But Olympic lifting is so technically driven. When you're working with kind of younger athletes, I know with older athletes, it's easier to be more technical and to your wording. But when it comes to working with kind of kids or young teens, what would be, how would you simplify it to the point where you're not overcomplicating it for them?
Yeah, that's a great question, because just a real short story that my first job at teaching high school kids at the school that I finally retired at, I was teaching 15, 16, 17-year-olds, and I was teaching these kids about ankle, knee, and hip extension with the barbell. And these kids' eyeballs were that big around. They ankle, knee, and hip extension. What does that mean, coach? And after the class was over with, I had this young lady come up to me, and she says, "Coach, you're confusing everybody." She says, "You know, you talk about your arms are like ropes and that you ankle, knee, and hip extend to create momentum on the barbell." And I said, "Yes, that's right." She says, well, why don't you put it in simpler form? And I said, okay, what would you tell me to do? She says, just tell them to jump. And that's how I started teaching. From that time on, I taught them how to jump. So the jumping action is the action that creates speed and velocity on the barbell, not the pulling action of the arms, but the jumping action. And then she brought out this jump rope. And on this jump rope, there was a weight hanging down the jump rope. And she says, Coach, there's your arms. The two arms of the jump rope, because the weight was hanging, I cut the jump rope in half and the weight was hanging down. So it was only like a 2.5 kilo plate. And she says, Joe, you keep talking about your arms are like ropes. Well, so what do you do when you jump, Coach? I said, well, I bend my knees and I load against the ground and I jump up. You mean like this? So she went down and she jumped that weight up. And what happened to the weight? It became weightless. It just went right up, because of that explosion against the ground with that jump. Now, she could have said, or I could have said, ankle, knee, and hip extend, and the visualization wouldn't have been the same.
Yeah.
But when she told me to jump that barbell through that range of motion to create acceleration and elevation on the barbell, it was like, OMG. And that 15-year-old taught me a valuable lesson that day. And that was probably 50 years ago. I mean, it was really an amazing lesson.
I've used that technique to teach Olympic lifting. I've literally put a 1 kilo plate on a skipping rope and go, it's not about your arms. But I never said just jump. I was always still, but also that anyone at any age can teach you a lesson, I suppose, is a really good one to be open-minded.
Well, you have to be open to do it. And everybody teaches the lesson. I still learn, I'm almost 76 years old and I'm continuing to learn still to this day. But I open myself up to that as well. Yeah. And a lot of coaches think that their way is the only way. And I've never thought that. I'm always looking to improve. But I haven't, in 50 years, I haven't been able to improve on jump. It's not about jumping high either. That's the other thing. You have to teach that. You have to teach them it's not about jumping high. It's about jumping hard, driving hard against the ground. And I just teach the jump because it's the double knee bend and the scoop or whatever you want to call it that gets that range of motion going and that bar to become weightless, so to speak. And
it's every kid will get it because every kid knows how to jump. And it's a really simplistic way of teaching a very complicated movement. And like you say, if you're open to learning, and I suppose to a point, everything works. Every program has a benefit, but what's the best benefit for the kid or the teen? But with all of that, and I suppose now, because we see it now, we've got kids that come in and they're very protected. They're like, so we've had some kids that don't know how to roll or tumble and climb, and they've never been allowed because it's overprotected. From what you've seen and what you know, and even like kind of with your own grandkids and your own kids over the years, what I believe that kids need a little bit more resilience, and they need to figure stuff out, and they need a little bit of hardship, they need to be able to fail and struggle and then process it and learn from it. What would be your kind of thoughts on that? And I think Olympic lifting is possibly one of the best ways to teach it, because there's a lot of failure at the beginning while learning. Yeah, there is. And, the other part of that is that my parents were no different. I guess that, I grew up in a time period that, corporal punishment, spankings were given. My own children were given spankings
today kids aren't given spankings very often. I mean, my daughter spanks her kids, and my son spanks her kids, but in love. But the bottom line is that the parents, you have to meet with the parents, and open house was something. The parents would come to my weight room, and I gave them my philosophy, and I told them that if you didn't want your students to be, but if you wanted your students to be coddled, that they should not be in my class.
Yeah.
I'm a former Marine. I spent 10 years in the United States Marine Corps, and I was not going to coddle students, and I didn't coddle my own kids, and I tell them that. So, for the most part, I would say 95%, even 99% of the parents, once that back to school night came in, the teacher parent meetings, and they've met me and they saw that I had the interest of their kids at heart. And yes, I was going to be tough on them, that I wasn't going to baby them. Then, 90% of them bought into my program. That didn't mean I didn't have trouble, because I'm a dumbass. I mean, I make mistakes, and and I'll say things that might be hurtful for somebody, but I also apologize for the mistakes that I make. If I do something stupid, then I'm going to say I'm sorry. I didn't mean to come across that strong, or maybe I hurt her feelings because whatever. But it's for her own good. I have her interest in mind. And I really rarely had any problems with parents. They all liked what I was doing.
Yeah.
I will tell you a funny story, because my son went to my school, and he was very strong. He was a 2008 Olympian. And I always talked about him using Longhorn steroids. And my school, our name was the Longhorns, Rancho Buena Vista Longhorns. So Longhorn steroids, I would tell my students, Casey gets strong because he uses Longhorn steroids. So these kids would go home and tell their parents that, Mr. Burgener feeds his kids Longhorn steroids. Well, the parents would call the principal, the headmaster, I think in your school system, and they came down to me, and they said, you can't be feeding your kid Longhorn steroids. And I told them, I said, Longhorn steroids are peanut butter and banana sandwiches. So I made my son eat peanut butter and banana sandwiches to gain weight, because he was too thin. I needed him to gain weight. And they laughed. They thought that was the funniest thing in the world, but they didn't understand me. They didn't. They thought, oh my God, the strength coach is feeding his kid Longhorn steroids. What does that mean? And so they got a big laugh at it. And after that, no one ever challenged it again. I mean, nothing, everything. They knew that I had a lot of tongue-in-cheek humor, and I liked to, I was very disciplined with my kids. But I never asked them to do anything I wouldn't do. If I gave them burpees, I did the burpees too. If I gave them push-ups, I did the push-ups too. And so the parents really bought into that teaching by, leadership, teach by example type of situation. So they liked me, but not in the beginning. They thought I was crazy, but I had to gain their trust.
Yeah. And that's I suppose that's normal, especially for parents and kids. But one of the things you mentioned is that you're like, when you're hard on them, and I heard this years. I can't remember where I got it from, but it was, if the day I'm not going to be hard on you, or the day I'm not going to kind of come down on you if you're doing things wrong, is the day I stopped caring about your progression and you getting better. And and you've already said it, it comes from a place of love, and it's to better you and help you become better. I think that's a great thing that you taught, and it's something that, and I've said it to kids over the course of coaching them from time to time, is the day I'm not focused on everything you do is the day I stopped caring. It's the day you need to leave the gym, or it's the day I need to shut my gym down. Would be more so. But no, it's a really good, I think every coach should be, if you want to coach kids or if you want to coach anyone, you should have that aspect of it rather than trying to be their best friend. Again, when you're coaching, you're kind of still being a parent to a point, I suppose.
Yeah, and I will tell you, I became a better coach after I became a parent.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I wanted my kids to be taught the right way. I didn't want them to be coddled. And so my wife and I were very involved in our kids' education. And, we always took the side of the teacher. We never took the side of the kid because we remember how we were as kids.
Yeah.
And I can remember my dad saying, I'm going, Dad, this teacher was wrong. And he says, too bad. He's right in my eyes. And so I just would like, okay. That's it. I know how this is going to be, so I better behave at school because I know I'm going to get my ass whooped if I got home and was not acting properly at school.
When it comes to, again, just weightlifting in general, I suppose it's slightly off topic, but it's kind of how your name became synonymous around the world. Is CrossFit pretty much dragged weightlifting out of the shadows onto the main stage? It's where I learned about it. I joined a CrossFit years ago, and this guy, Coach Colum, taught me these movements. And then because of that, I quit CrossFit and joined a weightlifting gym because I was like, this is my jam. This is what I love to do. Even though I was bad at it, it's what I really love to do. And you were there at the beginning, but when they approached you about it, like, was it kind of, yeah, this sounds good, or here, like, you can't be doing this type of movement with speed and for reps? And how did you find it when you were first introduced to CrossFit is probably the question I need to ask.
Well, Coach Glassman went to USA Weightlifting and asked them if he could set up what USA Weightlifting called a club coaching course at Rancho Buena Vista High School and have me teach it. So he ended up bringing down 20 athletes from, Santa Cruz. And this is way before CrossFit. I mean, the organized CrossFit as you know it. Yeah. So he came down and 20 athletes, Greg Amundsen, Ani Sakamoto, all the big name athletes in the beginning all came down, and I certified them in weightlifting. USA Weightlifting had a curriculum. But I used that curriculum, but I also used my curriculum that I used at my school, basically. So after that, a week or two later, Glassman asked me to come to Colorado with him to teach some first responders, Marines, Navy SEALs, police officers, firefighters, part of CrossFit. He had this idea of what CrossFit was all about. And he wasn't going to make a living. He wanted to sell his curriculum to these first responders. That's what he was trying to do. But when we went to Colorado, there were 50 first responders that attended our class. And this coach charged these guys $500. So there was $25,000 that this guy made, and all he paid CrossFit $8,000. He paid Coach Glassman $8,000, and Coach Glassman was happy to. Before he saw this, Coach Glassman was glad to get $8,000. I mean, that was a lot of money. So after that, after he saw that, he called me up a week later and he says, "We're going to start doing seminars in Santa Cruz once a month. We're going to charge $1,000 and we're going to cap it at 60. So every month he started in on these seminars, and I would drive up to Santa Cruz and I would do my 3-hour spiel on CrossFit. And all of a sudden, this thing just took off. So then the next year, after 1 year, the next year he comes to me and he says, "We want you to do your own course." And I was still heavily involved with weightlifting. This was like 2006 and 7, and in 2008 was coming up. I had athletes that were going to make the Olympic Games in Beijing. So I started traveling around actually around the United States. I did 5 in 2007, 5 courses in 2007, and USA Weightlifting saw all these courses I was doing. And then 2008, I did 10 courses. In 2009, I did 40 courses, and I did them all by myself. So I was the resident expert, and all I did was take my curriculum at Rancho Buena Vista High School and put it into a 2-day course. And my course has always been about fundamentals and skills and drills. It's always been about that. So when USA Weightlifting saw that this was happening, all of a sudden we started sending athletes that didn't necessarily want to do Isabel and Grace at those high numbers. They wanted to do weightlifting because they found out they had never heard of weightlifting before. They didn't think that they could do weightlifting. So CrossFit brought in this idea that everybody that's involved with fitness can do the Olympic lifts. And Greg Glassman loved the Olympic lifts. He liked the snatch and he liked the clean and jerk. So it just took off. And so weightlifting, all of a sudden their membership, and I was on the board of directors of weightlifting. I've always tried to sell them on this CrossFit thing, and they laughed at me. They thought I was crazy. But then all of a sudden they saw the numbers. Their membership went from 3,000 members to over 40 and 50,000 members, all because of CrossFit.
Yeah.
All because of CrossFit. And it just introduced more people, young kids, into the sport. And, CrossFit, Matt, you take Matt Frazier was a weightlifter before he was a CrossFitter. But, Catherine Nye was the CrossFitter that became a weightlifter. And so you take a look at the USA weightlifting teams today, most of those kids started out in CrossFit. And, and so CrossFit did a lot for, bringing weightlifting back to the world, as I say it. If it wasn't for CrossFit, I think it would still be a Neanderthal sport.
Yeah, because I learned it through CrossFit, and then I remember there was a lot of resistance from weightlifting, because I remember joining a weightlifting gym and I got an awful lot of slagging for roasting for being a CrossFitter. But now, again, a lot of those guys ended up doing CrossFit or trying CrossFit or been more welcoming to the CrossFit community, which I think has really helped a lot of sports. But weightlifting is probably one of the biggest sports it has helped grow, because
it really has. And it's once you get past the Isabels and the Graces, how many reps can I, how many seconds does it take me to do 30 reps or whatever it is? But you're only using 45 kilos, 43 kilos or something in the snatch, and 62 kilos in the clean and jerk. To the weightlifter, really, that's not very much weight. And my daughter-in-law, Natalie, was a 2008 Olympian, and first time she ever did Isabel, it took her 7 minutes and 30 seconds to do 30 reps, because she was so dialed in on her pre-setup. I got to set up the right way. I've got to do everything the right way. And then about a week later, after she did that first 7 minutes and 30 seconds, a week later, she did 30 reps in 2 minutes. That's pretty doggone good.
That's good.
For a non-trained athlete. She's not a CrossFitter, but she did 30 reps with 43 kilos in 2 minutes. That's pretty good. And she had excellent technique.
Yeah.
So, my philosophy was I can go as fast as I can as long as I have an 8 in my technique. So, but I've had to learn that Josh Evers, one of my first athletes who could snatch 125 kilos, he became a CrossFitter, and he did a Isabel in sub 60 seconds. But it was a rounded back, stiff-legged deadlift muscle snatch. It was the ugliest thing you would ever want to see. But he was so strong and athletic
Yeah.
that he could get away with it.
So the weight wasn't a problem.
The weight wasn't it? You're not snatching 100 kilos when you do Isabel,
Yeah.
or Grace. You're not getting up there in that weight. I mean, I know there's people that do Grace and Isabel with a little bit more weight, but still, the bottom line is that I had to grow with that. I had to learn that. But my philosophy to this day still is, if I'm going to do Grace and Isabel, I'm going to do an 8 or better, or the rep doesn't count. That's just me.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that. I know I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I have one more question, one more kind of thing. And I've seen this a lot, and I've heard the stories as well, of you're a fan of the burpee.
Well, the burpee is a great word for me because it's used with humor. But if I'm speaking with you and I watch you all of a sudden keep your eyeballs off me, and now you're starting to look around the room, or you're looking at your buddy and your whatever, then I always had the trigger term burpee. And the burpee, if I ever said the word burpee in my class, the class had to yell out, "Yay, burpees." And if they didn't yell it out, I knew they weren't paying attention to me. So the motivational consequence was they had to do burpees. So, I mean, I would be lecturing a class on the fundamentals of the snatch, and all of a sudden I'd see that, okay, I've got these 15, 16, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds in my class, and they're young and they're paying attention, but then all of a sudden they start looking at their buddy and they're starting to, "Hey, what are you going to do tonight?" type thing. And then I just say, "Well, what about burpees?" And if half the class yelled out burpees, I knew the other half of the class wasn't paying attention. So the whole class and me had to be given motivational consequences, because obviously I'm not doing a good job of making you listen to me. So we all had to do burpees, and we usually would have to do, and we had to do them the right way. If we didn't do them the right way, then we kept going until we got it done the right way.
No, that's motivational consequences. That is
motivational consequences.
is a great way of putting it.
So I became the burpee man. That was it. I could have used push-ups, but I just became the burpee man.
Oh, that's brilliant. Mike, Coach B, it has been an absolute joy to listen to you and take some golden nuggets from your experience as a coach. And then from anyone that is listening or watching the show, Mike's Instagram will be below. The link to the website will be below. If you check them out, they've got online programs. They've got a lot of stuff going on. And if you like this show, again, give us a like and subscribe as always. It means a lot, because it means someone's watching my show, which is great. But Mike, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's been a joy. And yeah, we'll see you all in the next one.
Trust me, every time my alarm goes off.
Depends on the sport a little bit, but I need to worry they're bad at what I teach.
So excited to hit this workout.
I'm so glad my parents never let me.
You're listening to the Live, Lift, Play podcast.